What's up, guys? PDC here, and today we're going to be continuing the competitive battling series, and what we're going to do now is basically a lecture. I'm not going to be showing you guys any visuals because this is something that, well, aside from me being very lazy and looking for specific games where I can talk about this topic, this is really a topic which is pretty universal and is applied in pretty much every game you will ever play. This is something which is the predecessor, the foundation to learning what we're going to learn next, which is prediction. But for right now, what we want to focus on and what we're trying to accomplish here is a sense of risk versus reward. And this is a term that has been thrown around in pretty much every single competitive game ever, any real-life situation ever. The idea of risk versus reward. However, in a sense of Pokemon, I'm sure you can all assume what it means, you know? I'm sure that for the most part, you people understand the concept of what a risk and the reward is. And the third part of it, which is, you know, one of the third part, but the part most often overlooked is the risk itself. And people who are, as we refer them to now as clickers on the Smokin' forums, people who just click the most ballsy move possible, only focus on the reward of a possible play. And you have to consider both the risk and the reward, as the name says. It's termed risk versus reward for a reason. And when I say this is an important concept for prediction, you'll realize that pretty much every move you make in a Pokemon game, from the very first turn to even before the first turn, is a calculated risk versus reward. What do you get out of the play? And what can you lose by making it? Is there a better option? Now, sometimes you pick the best potential option. Sometimes you don't. And risk versus reward is a way of the player deciding whether the move that they're going to actually click, or the switch, or whatever, is worth it. And to be worth it is, it's a lot of ambiguity when I say, is this worth it? Because whether something is worth it to one person and worth it to another person may be completely different. Somebody's sense of a reward or somebody's sense of a risk can be completely skewered. And really, the best way to really come to a logical conclusion is think about, truly, do you need to make this play? Are you in any danger right now? And if this goes wrong, do you lose the game? And is there really any incentive for your opponent to make the move which you think they're going to make so that you're going to make your move in response to that prediction? Risk versus reward is the most basic element of prediction. Without having a sense of risk versus reward, prediction turns into a game of clicking the not super effective move or clicking the most ballsy play because you want to show yourself off to your friends. Prediction is important, it is needed, it is something which you have to have in Pokemon to be considered even a remotely competent player. But just clicking the not super effective move and hoping it works is silly, Neopic. It's dumb, to tell you the truth. And people who do that usually don't get huge payout, except versus maybe super passive players who never predict or never do anything in response. The idea behind risk versus reward is that you should be able to now, with a foundation and some sort of logical basis, be able to make better, if not the best, plays in each situation. Now, sometimes you're going to have to make a move. You realize you're in a losing matchup, and you have to make very, very powerful, ambitious, lunatic plays early in the game to have a chance at winning. The risk versus reward is changed from a game where it's a relatively even matchup, because the opponent is going to be in a safer mindset, while the opponent maybe in a more balanced game is going to be in a more even mindset to yours, recognizing that they both have to make plays, you and him, to potentially win the game. And that's the thing about risk versus reward. Its most basic fundamental concept is prediction. But when you're predicting in Pokemon, I view risk versus reward as the foundation, because if you don't know what you're putting at stake, when you predict that HP Fire and you think you're going to hit Ferrothorn, you're HP Firing a Torrentee or something, if you don't know that risk, you can really, really never get anywhere in your games. You'll be viewed as an idiot. You'll be viewed as a clicker. And the one thing you don't want to be viewed at nowadays on Smogon is someone who is a clicker. And by clicker, what I mean by that is someone who, again, just goes with their, absolute instinct all the time. And instinct is something that I'll get to later. But for the most part, risk versus reward is something that you have to practice. So let's give you guys an example. Let's say you're facing a stall team. A very bulky team in Gen 7. And your opponent knows that they have the matchup on you. They have a clear advantage over your team. Your risk versus reward that game is, if you don't make any plays, unless you get supremely lucky, you are going to lose. Therefore, there is a much higher reward for you making a risky play and hoping it pays off, or choosing to predict at a higher rate. The reward is higher because your opponent may not have to make any, aggressive plays to gain momentum. Their momentum comes from their matchup. So you have to take control of the situation. Your risk may be high, but the risk of losing the game without making those plays is probably, your chances are you will lose the game if you have a bad matchup and you decide to do nothing, not to be proactive about it. In a more even matchup, let's say you're both using a balanced team, both have relatively basic, advantages, you each have strong points against the other. How do you play that game? Well, you can play aggressive, but it's probably advisable that you don't make those incredibly ballsy plays, because chances are you both have advantages and you don't need to make those ridiculous plays to win the game. You both have safer, routes, which may require smaller instances of risk versus reward, but you don't need to make these gigantic off-the-wall plays because your opponent is capable of doing the same. Your opponent is going to be in the mindset where they're well aware that they can predict on key turns, but just throwing out moves is less wise because, for one, if you lose your advantages in a game where you're both relatively even, that's not a good look. And it's not like you're going to be losing the matchup if you don't make these incredibly risky plays. By all means, predict and play well, but making outright really hard read plays is not necessary in most of these matchups, because it's about winning, and a prediction is ultimately chance. So, if it's not advantageous to you, or if your chance of losing is going up because you're predicting, and you're predicting wrongly, don't go for it. Now, if you're in a winning matchup, by all means, play as safe as you can. Predict when you have to, but recognize what your opponent's options are. If you can cut them off early and, kill their routes of winning early, great, that's amazing. But usually, you won't need to make crazy plays. Again, by all means, play well if you have a winning matchup, but make sure that you recognize that you don't need to predict and risk throwing the game out the window because you want to look cool. It's not worth it. Don't do it. Ever. Now, this is not to say that you don't want to make predictions when there's, a risk that may be potentially too great. Because certainly, go with your gut. I think instinct in Pokemon is a very powerful thing, and a lot of the times it has dictated how I played games. But what I encourage you people to do more when you play, and this is the first true step to the higher play level, this is beyond the basics, is when you're in the game, when you are actually playing the game, you have to, and I mean this, but I really mean this, you have to make sure that what you're doing makes sense, and that the risk is not going to throw the game out the window. Stop acting like you're some, superstar YouTuber. Stop acting like I do when I play the ladder and make stupid plays. Stop, doing these ridiculous, oh, I'm just fucking around plays or sequences, it's stupid. It's not going to win you big in tournaments. The last thing I want to mention is keep in mind of how your opponent is playing. If your opponent is playing passive, once again, depending on who your opponent is and how they are playing, what their skill level is, it alters your risk versus reward. People who are at a higher level are capable of more foresight and more, complex win conditions and sequences than most basic noobs are. So keep in mind who you're playing. If you know your opponent is better, then maybe you have to take risks because they'll beat you in an even game. The idea behind it is that you have to modify your risk versus reward at all times. It's not a stagnant concept. And just like in real life situations, the risk and the reward are different upon the actual overall, overarching situation. In the game, it is the same exact way. Thank you guys for watching, and next time, we're going to be covering, finally, prediction. This is the precursor to it, and now we're going to jump right in. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.